My name is Tom Garrett, and I've been running Garrett's Auto Repair on Highway 26 for 6 years now. It's not much, just a 2-bay garage with a small apartment overhead where I sleep, eat, and try to convince myself I made the right choice taking over this place when my uncle died. The nearest town, Pine Grove, is 40 miles east, and out here it's just me, the forest, and whatever poor bastard breaks down on this lonely stretch of road. I'm 34 years old, and I've spent most of my adult life elbow deep in engine grease. I like the work. It's honest, straightforward. You diagnose a problem, you fix it, customer drives away happy. There's a logic to it that I appreciate. Fuel pump goes bad, you replace it. Alternator dies, you swap it out. Cause and effect. Simple. At least, that's what I used to think. The weird shit started about 3 months ago, early June. I'd been having a slow week. Just a couple of logging trucks and one tourist from California who'd blown a tire on some gravel. I was closing up shop around 9:30, later than usual, because I'd been working on my own truck, when I heard a car pull into the lot. The engine sounded terrible, grinding and knocking like someone had filled the oil pan with rocks. I walked out of the bay, wiping my hands on a rag, and saw a sedan sitting under my floodlight. Dark blue, maybe 10 years old, nothing special. A woman got out, middle-aged, wearing a yellow sundress that seemed too cheerful for someone whose car was clearly dying. "Evening," I called out. "Sounds like you've got some trouble." She turned to face me, and that's when I noticed it. Under those bright work lights, with the sun fully down and nothing but darkness beyond the lot, she had no shadow, not a faint one, not a distorted one, nothing. Just her standing there on the concrete, like the laws of physics had decided she wasn't worth acknowledging. I blinked hard, figuring I'd been staring at engine parts too long and my eyes were playing tricks. But when I looked again, still nothing. The car had a shadow. I had a shadow. She didn't. "Can you fix it?" Her voice was flat, emotionless, like she was reading from a script she'd memorized but didn't understand. "I can take a look," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Pop the hood for me." She reached inside and pulled the release. I walked to the front of the car, lifted the hood, and felt my stomach drop. The engine was wrong. I don't mean it was damaged or missing parts. I mean it was wrong. The configuration didn't make sense. The alternator was where the distributor should be. The battery was mounted vertically, and there were components I didn't recognize at all, arranged in a way that shouldn't have allowed the car to run, but it had clearly been running. It was still hot, ticking as it cooled. "Mom, what kind of—" I started to turn around and nearly jumped out of my skin. She was standing directly behind me, close enough that I should have felt her breath on my neck. I hadn't heard her footsteps, hadn't heard anything. "How much longer do I have?" she asked. Well, I'd need to really dig into it, but maybe an hour for a temporary fix. Honestly though, I'm not sure. No. She tilted her head at an angle that was just slightly too far to be natural. "How much longer do I have?" A chill ran through me despite the warm summer night. I don't understand the question. She just stared at me with eyes that seemed darker than they should be, like someone had turned down the brightness in just her pupils. I turned away to grab a socket wrench from my toolbox, my hands shaking slightly. And when I looked back, She was gone. Not walked away. Not gotten in her car and driven off. Just gone. The sedan was gone too. I stood there in the empty lot, listening to the crickets and the distant rustle of wind through the pines, and felt my skin crawl. I walked to where the car had been parked. No tire tracks, no oil drips, no evidence anything had been there at all. I didn't sleep much that night. I tried to write it off. Exhaustion, stress, maybe some bad ventilation in the shop, giving me carbon monoxide hallucinations. I even bought a detector and stuck it on the wall. It never went off. But I couldn't shake the memory of that woman with no shadow, or the impossible engine, or the way she'd asked that question. How much longer do I have? 2 weeks passed. I threw myself into work, taking on any job I could get. An old Jeep needed a clutch replacement. A minivan had a busted catalytic converter. Normal stuff. Real stuff. I was starting to feel like myself again. Then Pete Hammond pulled in on a Thursday afternoon, hauling a load of Douglas fir in his logging truck. Pete was a regular, had been coming to me for years. Good guy, always paid in cash, always had a story about his kids or his arsehole supervisor at the mill. He climbed down from the cab looking agitated, his weathered face more lined than usual. "Tom, thank Christ you're here," he said. "Been hearing this screaming sound from the engine past 20 miles. Thought I was gonna have to limp back to Pine Grove." "Screaming?" I asked. "Like a belt or—" "No, man. Like screaming. You'll know it when you hear it." I told him to start her up. The engine turned over, ran smooth as silk. No screaming. No unusual sounds at all. Pete looked baffled, insisted it had been making the noise the whole drive over. I checked the belts, the pulleys, the fan. Everything looked fine. "Let me check your load," I said. "Sometimes logs shift and rub against the trailer. Makes weird sounds." I walked around to the back of the truck and climbed up on the side rail to look into the bed. The logs were secured properly, strapped down tight. But there was something between them. Something that made my breath catch in my throat. It looked like a person. Or it had been shaped like a person once. But the proportions were all wrong. The limbs were too long, bent at angles that shouldn't be possible, threaded between the logs like someone had woven them there. I could see what might have been a torso, a head, but twisted and compressed. "Pete!" I shouted, not taking my eyes off the thing. "Pete, get up here." I heard his boots on the gravel, then the clang of him climbing up beside me. "What is it?" "You don't see that?" I pointed directly at it. "Right there, between those two logs." Pete squinted, leaned forward. "See what?" "Tom, there's nothing there but timber." "Are you kidding me?" "It's right." I reached out to touch it, to prove it was real, and my hand went through it. Not like touching air, but like it existed in a space my hand couldn't quite reach, like pressing against a soap bubble without popping it. The thing's eyes snapped open. Pure black, no whites, no irises. Just darkness that seemed to pull at me. I jerked back, lost my balance, and fell off the side of the truck. Pete caught me, his strong hands gripping my arms, keeping me from hitting the concrete. "Jesus, Tom, you okay? You having a heat stroke or something?" We both looked up at the truck bed. Nothing there, just logs, bark, sap. Pete thought I was messing with him, or maybe sick. He left shortly after, still confused, probably thinking his mechanic had lost his mind. The next morning, I got the call. Pete's truck had gone off the road 20 miles down Highway 26, wrapped itself around a tree doing 60. He was in critical condition at the hospital in Pine Grove. They said he'd swerved to avoid something in the road, but there was no evidence of any obstacle. No animal, no debris, nothing. I drove out to the crash site that afternoon. The truck was still there, waiting for a heavy-duty tow. The cab was crushed, the trailer had jackknifed, and logs were scattered across the highway and into the trees. I stood there looking at the wreckage, and that's when I saw it. The figure, standing in the tree line about 50 yards away, between two massive pines. Same impossible proportions, same contorted shape. It was watching me. I could feel it, even though I couldn't make out any features from that distance. I got in my truck and drove back to the shop, going 80 the whole way. After that, things escalated. Her family in an RV pulled in for gas 3 days later. Mom, Dad, 2 kids. Normal-looking people on a normal summer road trip. While the dad was pumping gas, I noticed the daughter staring at me through the RV window. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old. She was smiling at first, then her mouth started opening wider, wider than it should have been able to. The corners of her mouth stretched back past her ears, and inside there was just darkness. Not her throat, not teeth, nothing but a black void. I stood frozen, watching this impossible thing happen, and the mother walked past me with a grocery bag, waving cheerfully. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" she said. When I looked back at the window, the girl was normal again, just a kid playing with a tablet. An old pickup pulled in at dusk a week later. The driver was maybe 60, wearing a flannel shirt and a Seahawks cap. He asked for directions to a place called Riverside. "Never heard of it," I told him. "You sure it's around here?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You will," he said. As he drove away, I caught his reflection in the truck's side mirror. The reflection showed a younger man, maybe 30, wearing clothes from a different era. Work pants, a grey shirt with a name patch. The reflection waved at me. The actual driver didn't. I started finding dead animals around the property. A deer near the east corner of the lot, stiff and cold. 3 raccoons by the dumpster. Birds scattered around the shop, all different species. They weren't torn apart or eaten, just dead, positioned in what I eventually realized was a circle around the building, all of them facing inward, all of them staring at my shop with their empty eyes. The nightmares started then. Always the same scenario. I'd be under a car, working on something, and when I'd slide out from underneath on my creeper, I wouldn't be in my shop anymore. I'd be deep in the forest, lying on a bed of pine needles, surrounded by trees that seemed to breathe. Their trunks would expand and contract, and I'd hear a sound like wind through leaves, except it formed words I couldn't quite understand. I'd try to run, but the forest would shift around me, and I'd always end up back in the same clearing, looking up at those breathing trees. I'd wake up in my bed upstairs, sweating, gasping, but sometimes I'd find pine needles in my hair, dirt under my fingernails. Once I woke up with scratches on my arms from branches I'd never touched while awake. My regular customers started acting strange too. They'd forget conversations we'd had minutes before. They'd stare at me too long with expressions that didn't quite match their words. Old Mrs. Patterson from Pine Grove came in for an oil change and spent the entire time talking about her husband, describing dates they'd gone on and trips they'd taken. Her husband had been dead for 15 years. When I gently reminded her, she looked confused for a moment, then smiled and continued talking about him, like he was waiting for her at home. I thought about leaving. I'd lie in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, mentally calculating how much money I had saved, where I could go, what I could do. But something kept me there. Partly, it was stubbornness. This was my business, my property, and I wasn't going to be driven away by stress hallucinations or whatever the hell this was. Partly, it was financial. I had everything tied up in this place. But if I'm being honest, there was another reason. Something had its hooks in me. The more I saw, the more I needed to see. It was like watching a car accident in slow motion. You know, you should look away, but you can't. Some part of me needed to understand what was happening, even as another part was screaming at me to run. It was a Tuesday evening in late August when Walter Sims showed up. I was closing the bay doors, getting ready to head upstairs and crack open a beer, when I heard footsteps on the gravel. I turned and saw an old man standing at the edge of my lot, right where the floodlights gave way to forest darkness. He was maybe 75, 80 years old, wearing canvas pants and a faded flannel jacket despite the warm evening. His face was heavily lined, weathered by decades of hard living, and his eyes had a sharpness to them that made me immediately wary. "Help you," I called out. "You're Tom Garrett," he said. It wasn't a question. "That's right. And you are?" "Walter Sims. I live up in the woods." He gestured vaguely behind him. "Been meaning to come by for a while now. Heard you've been seeing things." My throat went dry. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do." He walked closer into the light. Woman with no shadow. Things in the trucks. Dead animals. Faces that don't match their reflections. He rattled off the incidents like he was reading from a list he'd memorized. "It's been happening to you for months now. Getting worse. Am I right?" I wanted to deny it, to tell him to get off my property, but I was so damn tired of keeping it to myself. "How do you know about that?" "Because it happened to me too. Happens to everyone who stays out here long enough." He pulled a crumpled pack of cigarettes from his pocket, offered me one. I shook my head. He lit one for himself, took a long drag. "You know what used to be on this land before your uncle built his shop?" "No idea. Forest, I assume." "Lumber mill," Walter said. "Big operation. Ran from 1948 to 1954. Employed about 60 men. Processed timber from all over this area. Your shop is sitting right on top of where the main building was." Something cold settled in my stomach. "What happened to it?" "Accident. Winter of 1954, February. Equipment malfunctioned. Gears seized up while men were working on the line. 23 of them got pulled into the machinery before anyone could hit the emergency stop." He said it matter-of-factly, but I could see the tension in his jaw. "Crushed, mangled, torn apart. Worst industrial accident in Oregon history. Though you won't find much about it in any books." "Why not?" "Because the mill owners covered it up. Paid off families, paid off officials, bulldozed everything, and burned what wouldn't bulldoze. Then they paved it over, planted trees, and pretended it never happened. Your uncle probably never knew. Hell, most people don't. I thought about the contorted figure in Pete's truck, the impossible angles of its limbs. Jesus Christ. It gets worse, Walter continued. Something about what happened there, all that death in one place, all that violence, it changed the land, made it thin. That's the only word I've got for it. The barrier between what's here and what's somewhere else. It got thin. Things bleed through, especially at night, especially to people who spend too much time on this spot. The vehicles, I said, pieces clicking together in my mind. They're bringing something, or taking something. Walter nodded slowly. That's one theory. Another is that they're not bringing anything. They're just passing through the thin spot, and you're seeing what's on the other side. Echoes, maybe. Remnants. I don't pretend to understand it, Tom. I just know it's real, and I know it's dangerous. Why? I asked. What's it gonna do to me? The more you see, the more you become part of it. He dropped his cigarette and crushed it under his boot. It starts with seeing things. Then the things start seeing you back. Then you can't leave. You get pulled in, become part of whatever this place is. You need to get out, Tom. Sell the property, walk away, go somewhere else. Do it before you can't anymore. A dozen questions fought for space in my head, but I settled on the most obvious one. Why are you telling me this? If you know so much about it, why are you still here? Walter's expression darkened. Because I used to work at that mill. I was on the schedule the day of the accident, supposed to be on the line. But I called in sick that morning, had a fever, felt like shit. 23 men died while I was home in bed. He looked past me at the shop, at something I couldn't see. Been trying to make up for it ever since. Come out here when someone new moves onto the property, try to warn them. But nobody ever listens. They think I'm a crazy old hermit, or they convince themselves they can handle it, or they're too stubborn to walk away from their investment. And what happened to the people before me? Your uncle died of a heart attack in that bay over there. Owner before him drove his car into a ravine. Woman before that just disappeared one night, never found. He met my eyes. You seem like a good man, Tom. Don't let this place take you too. He turned to leave, walking back toward the darkness beyond my lights. I called after him. Walter, wait. I jogged towards him. Your truck, where'd you park? He paused, didn't turn around. Don't have a truck, Tom. I walked here. That's 15 miles from where you live. I know. He started walking again, and within a few steps the darkness swallowed him completely. I ran to where he'd vanished, shining my phone's flashlight into the trees. No sign of him, no footprints, no broken branches, nothing. I stood there for a long time, listening to the forest, before I finally went back inside and locked every door I could lock. That night, I researched everything I could find about lumber mills in this area. There wasn't much. A few references in county records to industrial permits from the 1950s. Some old maps that showed a structure roughly where my shop now stood. Nothing about an accident. Nothing about deaths. Just a gap in the records where something should have been. I tried calling the County Historical Society the next morning, but the woman who answered said they had nothing on file about any lumber operation on Highway 26. When I pressed her, she got defensive. said I must be mistaken about the location. Then she hung up on me. I couldn't sleep that night. I'd been lying in bed for hours, listening to the building settle, watching shadows move across my ceiling. Around 2 in the morning, I heard it, the metallic screech of the bay door opening downstairs. I'd locked that door. I knew I'd locked it. I'd checked it twice. I grabbed a heavy wrench from my nightstand and crept downstairs, my heart hammering in my chest. The stairwell opened into the shop office, and from there, I could see into the main bay. One of the overhead doors was up, letting in cool night air and the sound of crickets. There was a car inside, a pristine 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air, cherry red with white trim, chrome gleaming under my fluorescent lights. I'd never seen it before. I knew every vehicle I'd had in this shop for the past 6 years, and this wasn't one of them. The bay had been empty when I'd locked up. I was certain of it. Someone was sitting in the driver's seat. My grip tightened on the wrench as I moved closer, every instinct screaming at me to run back upstairs and call the police. But my legs kept carrying me forward. The figure in the car was completely still, hands on the steering wheel, silhouetted by the dashboard lights. As I got closer, I could see more details. The driver was wearing coveralls, work boots, covered in grease stains, and what looked like dried blood. I came around to the driver's side window and looked in. It was me. The figure in the car had my face, my build, my hair. But the eyes were hollow, sunken, and the skin had a grey pallor like something that had been dead for days. When it saw me looking, its mouth split into a grin that showed too many teeth. "You should have left when you had the chance," it said in my voice. The driver's door swung open, and the thing that looked like me climbed out. It moved wrong, joints bending at angles that sent spikes of pain through my own body. Just watching, it lurched toward me, still grinning, and I finally found the presence of mind to run. I bolted for the office, but the shop had changed. The bay seemed to stretch on forever, filled with equipment I didn't own, cars I'd never seen. I ran past bays that shouldn't exist, through doorways that opened into more darkness. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, and behind me I could hear the wet slap of footsteps getting closer. I saw light ahead, moonlight, and crashed through a door into the cool night air. Except I wasn't in my parking lot. I was in a clearing in the forest, surrounded by rusted machinery partially reclaimed by vegetation, saw blades bigger than car tires, conveyor systems collapsed and tangled with vines, a massive structure of rotted wood and twisted metal that might have once been the main mill building. The ground was slick with oil, black and reflective, catching the moonlight and throwing it back in strange patterns. Figures emerged from the tree line. Men, or things that had been men, wearing work clothes from 70 years ago. They moved with the same wrong angles as my doppelganger, limbs bent where they shouldn't bend, heads tilted at impossible angles. Some were missing pieces, arms, parts of their torsos, their faces. All of them were watching me with empty eye sockets or eyes that had turned to darkness. They formed a circle around me, and I realized I was standing in the exact center of where the mill floor must have been. This was where it had happened, where 23 men had died screaming. One of them stepped forward, closer than the others. His coveralls had a name tag, partially obscured by dried blood, but I could make out the letters SIMM MSW. Walter, I whispered. The thing that had been Walter Sims tilted its head, studying me. When it spoke, its voice sounded like wind through broken machinery. We tried to leave too, it said. After it happened, tried to go home to our families, to our lives. But the mill wouldn't let us. The land held us, pulled us back. We became part of it, part of what it is now. The other figures moved closer, tightening the circle. We wait here, between then and now, and we try to warn people. But nobody ever listens. I'll listen, I said, my voice breaking. I'll leave. I'll go tonight. Too late, Walter said, almost sadly. You've seen too much. You're part of it now. Part of us. The ground beneath me felt like it was falling away. The darkness rushed up to meet me, and I heard the screaming of men dying in machinery that hadn't existed for 70 years. I woke up on the concrete floor of my shop. Morning light was streaming through the windows, warm and golden and completely normal. Birds were singing outside. I could hear traffic on the highway. For a moment, I thought it had all been a nightmare. The most vivid, terrifying nightmare of my life, but just a dream. Then I sat up and saw the footprints. Black, oily footprints leading from the bay door to where I'd been lying. Not my boot prints. Prints from shoes they hadn't made since the 1950s. I tried to leave that day, got in my truck, threw some clothes in a bag, and headed east toward Pine Grove. I'd put the property up for sale, stay in a motel, figure out the rest later. I just needed to get away. I drove for 30 minutes, never taking my eyes off the road, watching the mile markers count up. But when I should have been getting close to town, the forest on either side seemed wrong. Too dense, too dark. The road started to curve in ways I didn't remember. And then I saw my shop appear ahead of me. Same building, same sign, same parking lot. I turned around, headed west instead. Same thing. 30 minutes of driving, watching the landscape get gradually stranger. And then there was my shop again, waiting for me. I tried north. I tried south. I tried side roads and Forest Service roads and paths that were barely more than deer trails. It didn't matter. Every road led back to Garrett's auto repair. The forest had me. The thin place had me. After the third day of trying, I gave up. Customers still come by. Broken alternators, bad transmissions, routine maintenance. I fix their cars like I always have. I take their money. I give them receipts. I tell them to drive safe. They have no idea what I see now. Every car that pulls into my lot has something in it. Shadows in the back seats that watch me with eyes I can't see. Faces in the mirrors that don't match the drivers. Whispers coming from engines that sound like men screaming. Some vehicles are covered in rust and damage I know the customers can't see. Some aren't really there at all. Just echoes of cars that broke down here decades ago, still looking for help. I see the mill workers too. They come and go, drifting between the trees, standing at the edge of my lot when night falls. Sometimes Walter is among them. He doesn't speak to me anymore. I think he tried to warn me, to save me, and now I'm beyond saving. I'm one of them. Not dead, but not quite alive either. Trapped in the thin place. Part of the machinery of whatever this cursed spot has become. Last week, something new happened. I was working late, replacing brake pads on a Subaru, when I heard the bay door open behind me. I slid out from under the car and saw someone standing there. It was me, another me, younger looking, less tired, eyes that hadn't seen what mine had seen. He was holding a wrench, looking scared and confused. Behind him, the bay door showed darkness. Not my parking lot, not the forest, just an absence of everything. "You the mechanic here?" he asked. I stood up, wiping grease from my hands with a rag I'd used 1,000 times. I looked at this other version of myself, this Tom Garrett, who was just starting to experience what I'd been living with for months. And I knew what I had to tell him, even though he wouldn't listen, even though it wouldn't change anything. "Yeah," I said, hearing the exhaustion in my own voice. "What seems to be the problem?" He opened his mouth to answer, and behind him I saw the woman in the yellow sundress. She had no shadow. She never did. She was walking toward us across the parking lot that existed somewhere else, somewhere in the spaces between. The other me didn't see her yet. He would soon. And then he'd see everything else, and he'd try to leave, and he'd find out that leaving isn't possible anymore. None of us can leave. Not me, not the mill workers, not the others who've been trapped here over the decades. We're all part of the machinery now, grinding away in the thin place on Highway 26, 40 miles from anywhere. And I've been here ever since, fixing cars and trying to warn people. But nobody ever listens.